November 14th, 1941, 10:42 p.m. 3 guns pointed at Bumpy Johnson's head. Close range. Back room. No escape route. 4 men blocking the door. Anthony "Tony Knuckles" Rizzo standing directly across the table, barrel steady, eyes cold, and Bumpy Johnson didn't move. Didn't reach for a weapon, didn't stand, didn't even raise his voice. He just sat there, hands flat on the table, looking at the guns like they were part of the furniture. The silence in that room lasted 8 seconds. 8 seconds where every man with a drawn weapon realized they weren't in control. Because the most dangerous thing in that back room wasn't the guns. It was the man who didn't react to them. What happened in the next 72 hours didn't just change how Lucky Luciano's crew operated in Harlem. It created a myth that would follow Bumpy Johnson for the rest of his life. A myth about the night he sat through guns and walked out untouched. To understand what happened in the Palm courtroom at Small's Paradise that night, you need to understand where Bumpy Johnson stood in 1941. He was 34 years old, already a legend in Harlem, but not yet untouchable. The kind of man the Italian mob knew about but hadn't fully tested. And in 1941, Lucky Luciano's influence was everywhere. Even though Luciano himself was in prison, his organization ran New York through proxies, enforcers, and carefully placed loyalists. They controlled the docks. They controlled the unions. They controlled most of Manhattan's rackets. But they didn't control Harlem. Harlem's numbers game was independent, lucrative, organized, run by black operators who answered to Bumpy Johnson, not the Italian syndicates downtown. And that was a problem for Luciano's people. Because in their world, independence meant disrespect, and disrespect meant action. By late 1941, Luciano's crew had decided it was time to remind Harlem who really ran New York. They picked the wrong man to remind. Anthony Rizzo wasn't stupid. He'd been working for Luciano's faction since the early 30s. Muscle, collections, enforcement. He'd broken arms in Brooklyn, made people disappear in Queens, walked into rooms and watched men fold before he even spoke. That's how it worked downtown. You showed up. You made it clear you were connected. People cooperated or they paid. Tony thought Harlem would be the same. It wasn't. Luciano's people had been watching Bumpy for months. They knew he controlled the numbers. They knew he had juice with politicians. They knew Harlem respected him. But they wanted to see if that respect held up under pressure. Real pressure. The kind that comes with guns drawn and no way out. So they sent Tony Rizzo and 3 of his best men to Small's Paradise on a Friday night in November. The plan was simple. Walk into the back room where Bumpy held court. Make it clear this wasn't a negotiation. Show him what real power looks like. Get him to understand that Harlem could operate independently. But only if Luciano's people allowed it. They expected Bumpy to negotiate. Maybe get angry. Maybe try to talk his way out. Maybe even go for a weapon and force their hand. They didn't expect what actually happened. November 14th, 1941. Friday night. Small's Paradise. On West 135th Street was one of Harlem's most important venues. Not just a nightclub, a headquarters. The back room, the Palm courtroom, was where deals got made, territory got divided, and power got confirmed. Bumpy Johnson was already seated when Tony Rizzo's crew arrived. Not waiting nervously, not pacing, just sitting at the table, hands flat, relaxed. A glass of whiskey in front of him, untouched. There were others in the room. A numbers banker finishing paperwork at a side table. The nightclub manager counting receipts near the bar. A musician packing his trumpet case by the door. A bartender wiping down glasses. All of them aware, none of them looking directly at Bumpy. At 10:42 p.m., the door opened. Tony Rizzo walked in first. 3 men behind him. All dressed like they were going to a funeral. Dark suits, hats pulled low, hands in their coats. The door closed behind them with a heavy click. The bartender stopped wiping. The musician froze mid-motion. The numbers banker didn't look up, but his pen stopped moving. Tony walked straight to Bumpy's table. "Bumpy Johnson," he said. Not a question, a statement. Bumpy looked at him, didn't stand, didn't nod, just looked. Tony pulled out the chair across from Bumpy, but didn't sit. His men spread out behind him, flanking the table. Strategic, professional. "Mr. Luciano feels Harlem's forgetting who keeps New York running," Tony said. His voice was calm, casual, like he was discussing the weather. Bumpy said nothing. Tony leaned forward slightly, hands still in his coat pockets. "See, we got no problem with you running your thing up here. Numbers, policy, whatever. That's fine. But there's a structure to this city, a chain of command. And lately, Harlem's been acting like it's separate, like it don't owe nobody nothing." Still nothing from Bumpy. Tony's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being ignored. "So we're here to clarify things," Tony continued. "From now on, Harlem operations get run through us. You keep your cut. We take ours. Everybody stays happy. Everybody stays alive." That last word hung in the air, and then Tony Rizzo made his move. He pulled his hand out of his coat, a .38 revolver, pointed it directly at Bumpy's face. His 3 men did the same. 3 more guns, all aimed at Bumpy Johnson from different angles. 4 barrels, close range, no cover, no backup visible. The room went completely still. The bartender backed slowly toward the far wall. The musician set his trumpet case down like it was made of glass. The numbers banker's hand was shaking so hard he dropped his pen. And Bumpy Johnson didn't move. He didn't reach for anything, didn't push his chair back, didn't stand, didn't even blink. He just looked at the guns, then at Tony Rizzo, then at the door behind them, then back at the table. 6 seconds passed, then 7, then 8. In that silence, something shifted. Tony Rizzo had pulled this move 100 times. Show the gun. Watch the fear register. Watch the person realize they had no options. Watch them fold. But Bumpy wasn't folding. He wasn't scared. He wasn't calculating an escape. He wasn't doing anything. And that's when Tony realized Bumpy Johnson wasn't reacting because he didn't need to. Finally, Bumpy spoke. His voice was quiet, calm, almost conversational. "If you were here to shoot me, you'd have already done it." 10 words. That was it. No threats, no posturing, no anger, just a simple statement of fact. And in that moment, everything in the room changed. Because Bumpy was right. If Tony Rizzo had come to kill Bumpy Johnson, he wouldn't have talked first, wouldn't have explained, wouldn't have given Bumpy time to react. He would have walked in and pulled the trigger. But he didn't, which meant this wasn't an execution. It was a bluff. And Bumpy had just called it. Oh, one of Tony's men, the one on the left, shifted his weight. His gun lowered slightly, not much, just a fraction of an inch. But everyone in the room saw it. Tony's eyes flickered. He was trying to decide what to do next. He couldn't shoot Bumpy now, not after that line, not after hesitating. Because if he shot Bumpy after Bumpy called his bluff, it wouldn't look like power. It would look like panic. And in the underworld, panic is weakness. Tony Rizzo had 2 choices: double down and pull the trigger, which would start a war Luciano's people weren't ready for, or back down and lose face, but keep the situation contained. He chose the second option. "You got a smart mouth," Tony said, his voice harder now. "But smart mouths don't mean nothing when you're outnumbered." Bumpy didn't respond. He just kept looking at Tony, calm, unmoved. Tony holstered his gun, slowly, like he'd made the decision himself, and not because Bumpy had forced it. He looked at his men, gestured with his head toward the door. One by one, the guns lowered. Tony leaned across the table, his face inches from Bumpy's. "This ain't over," he said quietly. Bumpy still didn't react, didn't lean back, didn't flinch. Tony straightened up, adjusted his coat, turned toward the door. His crew backed out behind him, keeping their eyes on Bumpy until the last possible second. The door opened. They walked out. The door closed, and Bumpy Johnson sat exactly where he'd been the entire time, hands flat on the table, glass of whiskey still untouched. The bartender exhaled. The musician picked up his trumpet case. The numbers banker grabbed his pen with shaking hands and tried to remember what he'd been writing. And Bumpy reached for his glass, took a slow sip, set it back down, like nothing had happened. Within 72 hours, word spread through every crew in New York. Not through official channels, not through sit-downs or meetings, just whispers, conversations in back rooms, phone calls between soldiers. You hear what happened at Smalls? Rizzo pulled iron on Bumpy Johnson. 4 guns, point blank. And Bumpy didn't move, didn't even stand up. What did he do? Told Rizzo if he was going to shoot, he'd have done it already. What'd Rizzo do? Put the gun away, walked out. By Sunday, Luciano's intermediaries were making quiet inquiries, feeling out whether Bumpy wanted to escalate, whether Harlem was going to retaliate. By Monday, there were requests for a formal sit-down, not demands, requests. By Tuesday, Tony Rizzo and his crew were reassigned. No explanation, no announcement, just quietly moved to Brooklyn operations, away from Harlem. The message was clear. Luciano's people weren't interested in a war over territory they couldn't control. But it wasn't just about avoiding conflict. It was about understanding something fundamental. You can't intimidate a man who refuses to be intimidated. The story of what happened in the Palm courtroom didn't become a spectacle. It became a myth. People didn't talk about it openly. They referenced it, alluded to it, used it as shorthand for how Harlem operated differently than the rest of New York. You know Bumpy sat through guns, right? That was all you had to say. Everyone knew what it meant. It meant Bumpy Johnson didn't need weapons to prove his power. It meant threats didn't work on him. It meant if you came to Harlem looking to flex, you'd better be ready to follow through, because Bumpy would call your bluff every single time. Tony Rizzo never set foot in Harlem again. He stayed in Brooklyn, worked collections, kept his head down, died in 1953 in a car accident that nobody investigated too closely. And Bumpy Johnson? He kept his table at Small's Paradise. Same back room, same chair, same calm authority. Because some men build their reputation through violence, and some men build it by sitting perfectly still, while others realize they've already lost. Years after that night, young hustlers coming up in Harlem would ask the old heads about Bumpy, about how he controlled the neighborhood without an army, without constant bloodshed. The old heads would tell them, Bumpy understood something most men don't. Power isn't about what you do. It's about what you don't have to do. And if the young hustlers asked for an example, the old heads would say, November 14th, 1941, Small's Paradise, 4 guns, 0 bullets. That was all the explanation needed.